Veteran British DJ Tim Westwood, long celebrated for promoting hip-hop and Afrobeats, now faces a serious legal reckoning. He's been charged with multiple counts of rape and sexual assault involving 7 women, with allegations spanning over 30 years from 1982 to 2016. Westwood, once a major gatekeeper on BBC Radio 1 and a supporter of African artists, had previously been accused in 2022 a Guardian investigation of exploiting his influence over young fans and emerging talent. Now, these fresh charges have revived wider debates about abuse of power, consent, and also responsibility within the music industry.
Now, as the case unfolds, it raises urgent questions. First, how does an industry celebrate cultural champions while confronting alleged misconduct? Another question is, Westwood denies all claims, but this moment forces a deeper look at how victims are heard and protected. And so joining us to give us a bit in-depth analysis on this is Kelechi Okafor. She's an author as well as a social commentator. Kelechi, it's good to have you on the program this morning. First of all, I would like to start, by this story has just reopened old wounds from 2022 with that revelation with BBC and Guardian, the investigation. When this first investigation broke, what does this new charges signify for the ongoing conversation around accountability in music media?
It's definitely a step forward. I think it feels like vindication for so many people who for years have been speaking about Tim Westwood's alleged behavior. I can think that's the actual cultural thing, that I can't think of any young black woman who, grew up around like the 90s to the early noughties, who doesn't have a story about Tim Westwood, about going to a club, going to an event, and some of the weird things, predatory things that he would say to the young women in that audience. And it's a shame that this is now, that we're only just being heard. Like, how long does it take for black women, young black girls, to be heard when they're saying that this person is a problem? But as you mentioned, he was a kind of industry juggernaut. And so you had black men kind of justifying his behavior to a certain degree, saying, I'm sure it wasn't like that. Why were the girls there in the first place? And he's done so much for the culture. He's brought so many people in the industry, almost as if it's enough to trace black women and black girls' bodies in order to have some kind of recognition on the world stage.
So, Kelechi, do you think that this is going to cancel everything that Tim Westwood has done or been known for? He's big on Afrobeats. He's brought it to the mainstream when it comes to the world knowing what Afrobeats is. Do you think this erases his legacy?
I find his legacy, if you're speaking with me personally, I find his legacy a bit laughable. I think it's the epitome of white privilege, in the sense that there are other more conversant, talented DJs who have a better ear for music, to a certain degree, arguably, who didn't get the shine because he had taken over so many aspects of it. It's almost as if our culture can only be acknowledged, can only be enjoyed, can only be accepted when it's presented by a white person. So what is his legacy really? A form of neo-colonialism, a form of cultural appropriation? It's not him that should be celebrated, it's the talent that managed to make it through, albeit he was some sort of portal for that to happen. But we know that, frankly speaking, the industry at that time, and currently even, isn't giving black people who are the originators of said culture the chance to kind of be at the forefront of their own kind of creative making.
Right. Kelechi, for the sake of balance, so forgive me for this, but one has to look at the entirety of the industry, whether UK or in the US. We've had sexual allegations charges, or sexual assault allegation charges too. Very recently, PDD, there's also R. Kelly. And when you flip it over to the UK as well, we have UK YouTuber Young Philly, who's also been accused of raping a British tourist in Spain, if I'm correct. And so one has to ask about the culture itself. Now, this allegation against Tim Westwood is from the 1996 all the way down to 2016, and one can only wonder how much more have slipped through the cracks. What does it say about mainstream media or the music industry or entertainment industry and what's happening behind the scenes that we don't know about?
Thank you so much for saying that, because it is about balance. And I love that you mentioned that, because look at the ages of the black men that you've mentioned who are being held to account. Tim Westwood was born in, I believe, 1957. 1957, he's 60-something years old, and only now is he being held to account. When we think about Harvey Weinstein, he was held to account in his later age as well. The young men, they are being apprehended, they're being held to account, they're facing justice much early, relatively earlier on than the white men who were doing these things. Across the board in entertainment, I would say as a society as a whole, we have a culture of misogyny, and they have been able to, regardless of race, regardless of age, get away with these behaviors for so long. And actually, when we're talking about Tim Westwood, there are allegations against him dating back to 1982, before the fall of the Berlin Wall. There are allegations against this man. The ones that were taken, I would say, more seriously have come in the time frame that you've mentioned, but actually it's been since 1982. How has he been able to get away with it for so long? We also have to look at the BBC specifically, because the BBC have issues with Jimmy Savile and how he assaulted and molested young women. Then we have Hugh Edwards, who also has allegations against him with child pornography. So why is it? It feels like, arguably, the BBC, one could argue, is a breeding ground for these predators.
Is it just the BBC itself? Sorry to cut you there, Kelechi. Again, just for fairness, is it just the BBC, or should employment or the companies that they work for also have some legal morality at stake, or should they also come onto that umbrella when it comes to pointing fingers or who's to blame? Because it's not just the BBC. Harvey Weinstein is one. PDD worked for companies and we've seen stories as far back as the 90s as well. So let's just throw BBC under the umbrella, but also companies who have these persons under their employment.
Definitely. I think that employers should be held to account, because they are, in a way, how these people manage to attain power and to maintain power. Because when when they are being booked for certain things, when you are hearing of Tim Davies, who became head of the BBC specifically in 2020, said that he had no recollection, he couldn't find any proof that complaints had been made against Tim Westwood when he went to look. But I know for a fact that that's inaccurate. There were complaints made, and so when we think about these companies, they go to cover their own back. Global as an entity that own Capital Extra, they were made aware of Tim Westwood's allegations and they still hired him. So I think, are these allegations being taken seriously enough? That's the issue. Is it so that misogyny is so pervasive in our society that it's merely seen as, oh yeah, they have that against them, but it's not a big deal? What will it take? What will it take for these companies to take the safety of black girls and women, of women across the board, seriously?
So Kelechi, are you saying that these networks should also be held accountable? Should they also be included in the suit?
I believe so, because they were, to some degree, aware of these allegations here and there. They should be held to account. I think it's the only way that we're going to be able to shift the culture. As we say in modern culture, money talks. If we don't affect the money of the companies who are letting these people work for them, then nothing's actually going to change. They're not feeling any repercussions. They're not being held accountable, and they should be.
I think we also need to talk about power imbalance as well, because one of the things that we're seeing is that the survivors describe being exploited under the guise of, career opportunities. And so we've also been pushing equity and more gender equality for positions of power. Are we ever going to see a power equity when it comes to media organizations at high-level positions, whether it's music, film, or television?
I hope that we will. I see more women, working in the industry. But as you mentioned, no matter how many women we actually have working in the industry, where does the power reside is what we need to ask ourselves. And also, is there a thing of the women, some women, not all, some women who make it into the higher echelons of these networks and these industries, they are also harboring misogynistic sort of ideology, so they perpetuate the very thing that we should be getting rid of. So regardless of gender, the culture of misogyny needs to change, regardless of whose body is carrying it.
Well, I mean, as we wrap up this discussion, I do have to just talk about Afrobeats itself, right? As we're talking about music, we're talking about, where the power lies, and, one has to talk about Afrobeats. It is gaining so much ground at this point. One has to say it has its own space at the table when it comes to international and global recognition and influence on pop culture itself. What do you say, or what do you think will happen in the next 10 years when we look at our artists and the managers? Are we going to see more stories? Do we need more accountability? Should there be transparency? What is your call to action to the Afrobeat industry?
I think when it comes to the Afrobeat industry, I think we need to start taking accountability for the ways in which we perpetuate damaging narratives. I remember a time on Twitter when two well-known Afrobeat artists were arguing with each other, and one was saying, well, I know that you sexually assaulted this person, and they said, yeah, but didn't you sexually assault this and that woman way back when? And their music is still doing well. One of them in particular continues to grow in terms of popularity. So even when this is playing out in front of us on social media, I think we as consumers, as listeners, we're not taking it seriously enough ourselves to say, actually, when we hear these things, when these men are arguing in front of us on social media about the women that they may or may not have sexually assaulted, what are we doing about not letting them have any of our money going forward? We control the narrative, and I want for Afrobeats to be respected, continue to be respected globally. But for that to happen, we need to understand that there are certain things that we should just not allow to be pervasive in our society and in our culture.
Cancel culture. Finally, as I let you go, Mazzino raised it here, my co-host raised it here about cancel culture and whether or not we can separate, the art from the artist, and, what it means for legacy. For Afrobeats, cancel culture, legacy.
Let me also put something in there, Judith. The fact that Afrobeat actually is suffused by this culture of sexuality itself. One might argue that that's just the environment you find yourself, and argue about the allegations that are being made against Tim Westwood. So what do you say to that, the culture in itself of sexuality when it comes to Afrobeats or music generally?
I think that sexuality is only enjoyed, it should only be celebrated when it's consensual. And the songs that are being made aren't talking about, for the most part, they're not talking about non-consensual sex or intimacy. They're not doing that. And this isn't just something isolated to Afrobeat. So I wouldn't want for us to hypersexualize ourselves through through the white gaze, through the white lens, because there is a hypersexuality that's kind of inflicted upon us, and that shouldn't be part of our legacy. But when we talk about cancel culture, I argue controversially that cancel culture doesn't actually exist. I can't think of one person really that has been successfully cancelled. The fact of the matter is there'll always be an audience for these performers. For the most part, what we're actually talking about is accountability, and we should not separate the art or the artist from accountability.
Kelechi, thank you. We appreciate you for coming on. We thank you so much for your insight, and this has been quite an important discussion. It needs to be had as we continue to, grow our influence when it comes to Afrobeats music and African music on this part of the continent.